Hello, family, and welcome to Amazing Parents Network. I am the host of this show. My name is Ali Lankarani, Dr. L, the Parent Whisperer. I'm a clinical neuroscientist, and I am very happy that you have taken the time to be here with us tonight. We have dozens of experts that are going to be presenting in the upcoming months. These are called the Family Education Series. Please invite your friends and family to come and benefit from the resources and the expertise that is going to be presented here. We're glad to have you here. We're glad to have our experts. Enjoy tonight's presenter. Thank you.
Hey, everybody, how are ya? Or I should say aloha, y'all. Let's get busy. So, welcome to, this is Finding Your North Star, advice for talking to your child, your adult child, about their work search and helping them out. So my name is Malcolm Grissom, and I want to tell you a little bit about myself. So the first thing that that you should know about me, well, I want to be a little vulnerable here for a moment, if I can. I mean, it's true that I now have over 14,000 hours counseling adults with their work search and helping them out. But several years ago, I struggled with my own employment. And at the time, I associated career with identity. And I didn't have a career, so I had very low self-worth, very low self-esteem. It got so bad that I eventually wondered, am I ever going to be able to find a suitable and successful career? Or, should I just give up? And I even contemplated suicide at that point. It was so bad. And then eventually I faced myself. I sat down and I faced with a choice: either find support to find that successful career path, or just give up and face a very unfocused future, or no future at all. And see, at the time, I thought the best career for me would be stand-up comedian. And I was determined to find support and to find that path that I needed to become a successful stand-up comedian. So I borrowed some money, and I found some very valuable coaches who started me on that career path. But I immediately became more confident in myself. And because of that self-confidence and that self-worth and that knowledge that now I had a path to where I wanted to go, well, then I was hired by California's Employment Development Department, the Unemployment Division, Unemployment Insurance Division. And I spent over 20 years working with unemployed adults, first specifically with unemployment insurance, and then with helping people find careers and find new jobs and work on things like their resume and their interviewing techniques and the networking and all those things that you hear about in the cover letters and all those nifty things. And so I spent my life helping adults with this. And this is why I am so passionate, because I've seen the older adults, in older meaning farther advanced in their lives, struggling with not having a path, struggling with not knowing what to do, struggling with reinventing themselves. And because I've seen that, that's why I'm so passionate about helping parents support their older children to get started and to continue throughout life, because that's one of the biggest mistakes is that I've seen a lot, is that parents will just, they'll be supportive at first. They'll help their children get started at first, but they forget. In today's workforce, especially in today's workforce, your children are going to have to reinvent themselves very often. It's not like when we were growing up, when we could find a job and that would be our job for the next 20 years. Or, very often that's not what's happening in this job market. There's a couple of statistics that I want to bring up. A very recent statistics. There was a Gallup poll, very recent Gallup poll, that said that there was only about 21% of working adults that were engaged at work. 21% engagement. And only about 20% of those were actually passionate about what they do. Okay. Which means that there's 80% of working adults that are either don't like their job, they hate their job, they're not engaged, meaning they're neutral, they're Switzerland about their job, and here's another fact. The average American spends 90,000 hours working throughout their lifetime. 90,000 hours working in their lifetime, right? That's all this time that they're spending away from their family, away from their loved ones, away from their other passions, their hobbies, right? If they're not lucky enough to have their hobby be their job, to be their career, what they do, and some of us are. But if they're not, that's time away from their hobbies. 21% are engaged, right? I mean, so it's really important to, first of all, to find a path, to help your child find a path, your adult child find a path that a career path that they want to pursue. And it's also just as important that you are consistent with your child in helping them, your adult child, in helping them understand that they are going to reinvent themselves. Understand that this is not something that's they're stuck with for the rest of their life. Part of that 80% are people that have followed a path and they've been successful with the path, right? If you want to call success in meaning that they've accomplished a lot in various jobs, they have made a good living and a good career. If that's how success is measured, then they can be very successful in their career, and they don't like it. They don't like it because they weren't given choices. They weren't shown how they can reinvent themselves. And so they're stuck in this career. A couple of things to think about. Anyway, last week we talked about helping your adult child find their career path, find their North Star. And like I just said, we are going to have to reinvent that process throughout their careers. And so we want to show them how to reinvent themselves throughout their careers. I've talked about that a little last week, and I'll continue talking about that throughout the upcoming weeks. Today, though, I'd like to focus on the resume. Because there are a couple of things that I want to talk about the resume. First thing is that we spend entirely too much time focused on the resume. We do. And it's a very modernistic way of thinking. The resume is the absolute be-all, end-all way to find a job. We need to start our work search with the resume. It's so ingrained in our minds, in our society, that our governments and our school, and I can say this because I spent 20 years working for a government for the state of California. So I know that our government works this way. And then I know that our schools work this way just because, and let me go back and say that most of the average public school is what I'm talking about, not the private schools that they have, because a lot of times the private schools have a lot more flexibility in their agendas. They have a different approach at things, and that's great. So right now I'm just going to focus on public schools and the governments and how they think of the job search. And the resume is absolute. The resume is very important. So let's start with my story, my experience of the resume. So when I was a kid, when I was in college, or even in high school, I was taught what a resume would look like. Basically, a basic resume would look like. And there are 3 types of resumes, and I'll go over this again, and specify the 3 types of resumes. But the chronological resume, or the reverse chronological resume, that's the resume type that we in America are most used to seeing. That's the type that most public high schools and the government, they're going to push that type of resume. The California, for instance, there's a in our state, we have a job search board that everyone on unemployment insurance is required to participate in this job search board because it helps people look for work, right? And it helps people build resumes. And the primary format that is used in that system is the chronological or reverse chronological resume, because that's what we're most used to. And that's what, so as a kid, that's what I was taught my resume should look like. So basically, the chronological resume, a list of jobs, the list of jobs that I had, the list of job duties that I had, and the dates, and my education. And that was the resume, the chronological resume that I was taught. Today's workforce, the resume, the importance of the resume is only about 15, 20% maybe. So think of a pie chart, right? Think of a pie chart. This is everything that you need in order to, I'm sorry, I don't have slides, but I thought, seeing my hand would be better than having a slide, right? So think of a pie chart, right? A pie, this is everything that you need to find a job, right? Think of that. The resume is a teeny slice of that pie, right? Everything else, well, there's interviews and the networking and other things that we're going to talk about throughout this series, but the resume is very, very small in actuality, a very small percentage in actuality. And yet it is the first thing that governments or public schools or even colleges, right? Because they all follow the same type of agenda. That's the first thing that they're going to push in order to find a job. So the first point that I'd like to make today is that people spend way too much time on their resumes. People spend way too much time on the resumes. The resume itself is not super important. And why? Because when an employer gets a resume, okay, and there are a lot of things that lead up to this. Like if you're looking online, you have the ATS, or the applicant tracking system software, that you have to deal with before it even gets the human eyes. And so for those of you that don't know what applicant tracking software is, that's a software that employers use to basically, they put in algorithms of, they put in the keywords or whatnot that they're looking for, or the very basic requirements for the job that they're looking for. And every resume, the hundreds of resumes that come in online, the first thing they do is they go through this applicant tracking software, and that pulls out the resumes that don't readily fit what the employer is looking for. So then the employer has less resumes to go through. But then if your resume makes it through that step, makes it to human eyes, the employer is going to look at a resume about 6 or 7 seconds. That's the latest statistics, 6 or 7 seconds. The employer is going to glance at that resume. So what's important in the resume? Well, it's important that you have the skills. It's important that the jobs, that's what they look for. Things that they look for in the resume, they look at the skills that you have. They look at the jobs that you've had, and the dates, the actual job title, where you've worked, and the dates. And that there are no glaring issues like misspellings. That's what's most important in a resume. And yet, we spend all this time focusing on the resume, focusing on the bullet points on the resume, focusing on what jobs should we put in, what shouldn't we, and how should we use the resume to market ourselves. Now, mind you, I'm not saying that the resume is not important. It is. It is important. It is a very important tool, and using the resume to actually find the correct job and to speak for you before you can get into that interview. That's a very important tool to get into that interview, and in the work process, in the work search process, right? So it is very important, but we spend entirely too much time worrying about it. Second thing that I want to point out, I want to talk about the different components on the resume. Okay, so the very first thing that we should know about a resume, and that we should tell our adult children or anybody that asks us about a resume, the first thing that we should point out is the importance of the little things. Spelling, grammar, the margins. Are your margins correct? Is everything lined up? Do you have your employer on one job? Do you have your employer first, then your dates next to that, then under your employer, your job title, and then another job down the line, you have your job title up front, followed by the employer on the line below, and then your dates next to the job title. Or do you have, so basically you get the point. Consistency. Is everything consistent? Does it all look consistent? Are all of your margins consistent? Do you have the same font throughout the resume? This is very important. The same font throughout the resume. The little things, that's important. So let's talk about the little things. So right now, in the resumes right now, the main two types of fonts for most jobs are either Calibri or Arial. And then it's either somewhere between 10 and 12 points. However, there are some industries, such as the tech industry, that actually prefers Times New Roman. Something to think about, though, something to think about, especially for older workers, is that unless you're using an industry-specific font, such as the tech industry, they ask for Times New Roman or they expect Times New Roman. Unless that's the case, you want to use the most current fonts out there. What's being used today by the majority of the resumes. And the reason is because that can be used to discriminate against you. Something as simple as that can be used to discriminate against you. Now, granted, that was a tip more for the older adults rather than our tip for the parents when working on their own resumes rather than helping their children. But I also wanted to give that out to you as well. See, you get a couple of interesting and exciting prizes and tidbits. So anyway, there's the fonts and the fact that the margins we now want to be about an inch, 0.7 to an inch, anywhere from that, 0.7 to an inch, not less than that, and not really more than that, okay? So 0.7 to an inch for margins. As far as how the resume looks, there is no perfect resume. There is no standard for how a resume should look. Employers don't expect every resume to look the same. As I said before, there are three formats of resumes. There's the chronological, there's the skills-based or the functional, and then there's the hybrid or the combination. The chronological resume is used for people who have a history of work in the same industry. So I like to use the example of a lawyer. Okay, a lawyer using a reverse chronological resume. Well, that resume is going to actually draw a line. The employer can actually draw a line from, okay, I got out of school. Here's where I graduated law school. And then after that, I became a paralegal. And then I became an assistant. And then I became a partner. And then I switched to a different law firm, and so on and so forth. And that's the reverse chronological resume. It's somewhere where all of the work is done within the same industry. That's what the chronological resume is for. That's the person that needs to use the reverse chronological or the chronological resume. The skills-based resume is a resume for someone who wants to highlight their skills, someone who wants to not highlight their work experience, meaning someone that has employment gaps, maybe even someone straight out of college. They're going to highlight their skills, right? They're going to highlight their education and their skills and the duties they did. Now, even on a skills-based resume, the work experience is still there, right? So work experience is still there. You're still going to list that. However, it's not going to be prominent. You're highlighting your skills. It's all about the skills, right? Then there's the combination or the hybrid, which is, as I'm sure you can guess, a combination of the two. That's actually what most people today use, because most people today aren't in one job, or one industry, maybe different jobs within that industry, not one job or one industry. For instance, with my resume, so with my career, I had a career path, right? I had a very clear career path. However, on that path, to get to that career, I've gone through different industries, and therefore I want to highlight the different skills that I've had in these various industries, that I've picked up in these various industries. But I don't want it to look like I'm highlighting my jobs, my job titles, and where I've worked, right? I don't want to highlight the fact that I've worked in all these different places, because if an employer then looks at my resume, then the first thing that they'll look at is my work experience and the job titles and the job industries and everything, and they'll see that I've bounced all over the place, and that's one strike against me, right? So I personally would use the combination resume, because I'm going to highlight my skills, but I'm also going to highlight my work experience, because that's important. It's important that employers know that I work, that I have a good track record when it comes to working, that I can be relied upon, right? These are the very small things that sometimes we overlook, but they are very important to employers. And that's what the combination does. It highlights both resumes, are both the skills and the work experience, rather than having one highlighted over the other. So knowing the right format is important. What's important on the resume? Your contact information, first of all. That's the first thing that employers are going to look at. That's the most important thing. What's your name? And how can they contact you? And having a professional contact is important as well. So having a professional email is important. Email address is important, right? And this is an important thing to teach to your older adult children is, hey, if when you are looking for work, maybe having Big Joe at gmail.com is not the best email address to have on your resume. It's not the most professional. Maybe it's not what you want to portray. You definitely don't want to portray like a big titty at big titty 5543 at gmail.com. You definitely don't want to promote anything like that. So that's important, right? Also, LinkedIn. I'll be talking more in a different lesson, more in depth about LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is used. It's a very, very, very useful tool for job seekers, and it's used by many recruiters out there and employers. That's one of the first places they go to search is LinkedIn. So having a LinkedIn profile right there in your contact information is important, right? Having your now, whether you put your number, your phone number, your city, state, that's up to you. You don't need to put your full address for safety reasons. So you don't need the full address. You don't even need the city and state. You just need an email address and your LinkedIn. That's the minimum. If you want, you can add a few more ways to contact you. That's important. The contact section. The next section that's important. No. Well, the next section that appears on a lot of resumes is the professional statement. And this is, it used to way back in when I wrote my first resume was your objective statement. You know, I want to get a job at McDonald's. That was what the first thing that would appear on my resume. That is not, it's not important to have an objective in today's resumes. It's not specifically important to have a professional statement. However, that would be the next section, or I would say the first section in your resume, in the actual so the header, the contact information, you're going to have the contact information in the header. So in the actual resume, in the body of the resume, this would be the first section, the professional summary. And essentially, this is a summary of who you are professionally. This is the one part on the resume where you can be, you can use a little prose, very, you can speak in a few 3 to 4 sentences, right? Everything else on the resume is short phrases and bullet points and very quickly, things like that. This is probably going to be one of the first things that employers, after they look at the key things that I talked about, they're probably going to come back to this section and read about who you are, right? And so you want to avoid words that are very subjective, words that are empty, words like team player. I'm an outstanding team player. I'm an excellent team player. I'm looking for ways to expand on my skills. These things don't really say anything to an employer. So you want to avoid that, right? But a nice, concise statement of who you are as an individual, as an employee, who you are, right? That's what you want. The next section then is the skills section. Well, see, now here's where it all varies. So I'll talk about what's most important on almost every resume, except the skills-based resume, which employers don't really like, is the work experience, right? The work experience. In today's resume, we only want to go back about 7 to 10 years in experience, right? And if you're dealing with a child, an adult child, again, let me say adult child. So when I say child, I'm talking adult child. They may not have a lot of experience, right? And so therefore, perhaps the skills-based or the combination resume that highlights the skills over the work experience is most important and most useful for someone who is just getting started. Now, another thing that I want to point out here about skills is there's another type of resume. You might have heard about this. There's the master resume. The master resume, what that is, this is not something that you're ever going to send out. This is a list of everything, a list basically, or a description of absolutely everything, all of your job duties in all of your jobs, a list of all of your jobs, every job going throughout your lifetime if you want. Again, these things aren't this isn't necessarily going to be on your resume that you're going to send to employers. But if you have a lot of volunteer experience, if you are a homemaker, right? For instance, and I'm using this, using these two things as an example, as examples. You can use some things that you do and you don't normally think of as relevant for the job search. You can use them to highlight your skills, to market yourself, right? So don't keep that, don't forget that when you're thinking about skills. Okay, so there's the skills that may or may not be the next section, but what is most important is your work experience. And like I said, it's most important that it's all formatted in the same style, in the same way, that there are no errors, there are no grammatical or spelling errors, and that the bullet points, instead of your job duties, you want your bullet points to show your accomplishments in your job. Because your employer, if your employer gets to read these bullet points, if they do that, they want to know, what can you do, you, the job seeker, do for them? So what can your child do for this company? That's what they want to know. How you can answer that, or how your child can answer that, is through the job seeker. How the job seeker can answer that is through accomplishments, what they've done. Okay. The third thing that's really important about the resume, and this is actually important about the entire job search and career search, right? This goes back to the foundation of my business. My business is called Aloha Storytelling and Coaching. Storytelling is so important in everything that we do. Everything. Job search included. Resume included. We want the resume to tell a story. Okay, we want the resume to tell a story. So for your recent college graduate, that resume is going to tell the story of, here's where I've gone to school, here's what I've studied, here are the things that I've studied, right? Here's what kind of student I was. Then here are some of the things that I did when I was in school. Some of the places that I volunteered, some of the places that I worked off campus because I had to work, and they're not necessarily within my career, but they're jobs and they are important. They show commitment. That's very important, right? And here are some of my other interests. Basically, that's the basic story that the recent graduate's resume is going to tell. Every resume needs to have a story. And, excuse me, it's important to think of story throughout your resume writing. In your bullet points, people struggle so long and hard in their bullet points and thinking of accomplishments in their bullet points, but think of this. Think about your bullet points. Each bullet point should be a story in itself, right? And this is another thing that I'll mention when we talk about interviews at a later date. But each bullet point should be a story in itself. And therefore, you won't have as many, you might not have as many bullet points or stories as you might not have as many bullet points as you think you ought to have, right? Malcolm, I only have 2 or 3 bullet points. Are they stories? Well, yeah. Do they talk about accomplishments? Yes. Why do you need more? You don't. Don't spend so much time thinking about bullet points and that this is impressive. How can I impress the employers with what I've done and everything? And I need to have all these bullet points in my resumes. No, you don't. You don't need all of that. What's important on a resume? Well, it's important to know that you need the format is important. You need the right format for your job and your job history. So if there's not a right resume, but I think there's a right format, just like I think there's a right way to organize things and the right way to say right way. Sorry, I got lost there. There is a right way to organize your job history, I think, and that starts with the format. And so there is a right format. So you want the right format. That's important. It's important that everything is consistent on the resume. It's important that you are not making spelling errors. You're not making grammatical errors. You're not, everything is consistent. All of your margins are consistent. Excuse me, everything is aligned. That's important. And it's important that your resume tell a story. Those 3 things. It's important that you don't spend a lot of time. It's important that you have the right format and your resume looks presentable and professional. And it's important that your resume tells a story. Those are the 3 most important things to remember and to take away from this. So, excuse me. There are a couple of things that I want to leave you with, a couple of action points, because I know you're probably asking, so Malcolm, all of this information is great, but what can I do? What should I do now? Here are 3 things to start with, 3 action tips. The first is don't do this alone. And when I say don't do this alone, I mean, don't try to be the only person for your adult child, the only person that's guiding them along the lines. Don't try and look up information using the internet and, and use that as a guide to help your child. Find other people around you. Surround yourself. Start your child, your adult child, the job seeker. Start the job seeker with a networking, with a network. Start them with a network. Surround them with people like myself that know about the trends in today's workforce, that know about these tips on how to look for work, what you should do, how these resumes, interviewing techniques, and all that, and the cover letters and the LinkedIn profiles and all of that. People like myself, surround them with people like myself, and also people successful people in different industries. Maybe some in the industry that they want, some in other industries. Why? Because they're going to change their mind many, many times. I mean, I mentioned last week, I mentioned the personality. Psychology Today says that the most recent studies say that the personality, there's some sort of trait that will change every 6 years. And a major, that may or may not be a major change, but that is a personality change. And therefore, and just like that, the job and our desires, they're going to change, right? And so we want to surround our adult children with people who are going to support them throughout their lives, people that they can always come back to. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, don't try, you want to be supportive. You definitely want to be supportive. And you don't want your support to end as soon as you put them on the right path to a career. Say, you don't want your support to just end the first time they get a job. And then that's fine. Mom or dad's support, it's gone. Or we're still here in the background, but just in the background. And, don't really count on us. And at the same time, you don't want to be the helicopter parent or the career police, the people that always talk about this is how you should do it, or why. Don't ask why. Instead, ask, have you ever considered why you want to do this? Those are the things that I want to leave you with today. And I would like to invite you to come back next week when we are going to be talking about a little bit more about the resume, I'm sure, but we are going to be focusing on the cover letter. All right, folks. Talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.